is that? Oh my god, oh my god.
Welcome to today's video. My name is Wade Hunter, and today we're going to dive into this question. What if you took an AI system, fed it every piece of physical Bigfoot evidence ever documented, and told it to solve the Skookum Cast Mystery? That's exactly what happened. But instead of just debunking it, the system came back with a conclusion that nobody had been able to reach on their own. The AI didn't start with assumptions. It didn't start with the most famous piece of physical evidence or the most controversial one. It started with the question nobody had thought to ask correctly. What can you actually measure from a ground impression? And what does that measurement tell you about the thing that made it? Because here's the thing about physical evidence that gets lost in the Bigfoot debate. Everyone wants a body, a bone, a carcass, something that a scientist can put on a table and describe and name. And the absence of that has been used for decades as the conversation ender. No body, no species. Simple as that. What the AI pointed out is that this logic doesn't actually hold. Physical impressions tell you things. The right impression, in the right conditions, analyzed correctly, tells you body mass, limb structure, weight distribution, behavioral patterns, and biomechanical signatures that are just as species-specific as a skeleton. You just have to know how to read them, which is exactly what the system was built to do. So it went looking, and what it found changed the entire framing of what the Skookum Cast actually is. September 2000. A research team ventures into the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington State with a specific objective. Not a casual camping trip, not a documentary crew chasing drama. A scientific field operation. The team included wildlife biologists and researchers from the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, and they had a plan. They established a monitored bait station in a remote clearing, fruit and meat placed in a shallow depression of soft, silty mud, and then they left. Completely. No human scent near the site. No lingering presence. Just the bait, the mud, and whatever happened to come through the area that night. They expected wildlife. Deer, maybe. Evidence of raccoon activity. The kind of ordinary animal interaction that happens every night in forests like that one. What they found in the morning was not ordinary. Pressed into the mud around the bait station was a massive, detailed impression. Not a footprint, not a paw mark, a body impression. Something enormous had come to the bait station, lain down beside it, and fed. The shape was too large, too detailed, and too anatomically specific to dismiss as random ground disturbance. The team looked at it, and none of them, people with decades of field experience between them, recognized it as anything they'd ever seen before. They cast it in plaster. It took 200 pounds of casting material to fill it. The resulting object is now housed at the Museum of the Rockies in Montana, where it has been examined by credentialed wildlife biologists, primatologists, and forensic anthropologists. And the debate over what made it has continued ever since. The AI didn't care about the debate. It looked at the data, the elk theory, and why it doesn't survive the numbers. The first explanation that skeptics reached for was elk. And honestly, that's not an unreasonable starting point. Elk are large animals. They inhabit that area. Elk tracks were found nearby. If you squint at the general shape of the impression and don't think too hard about the details, you can talk yourself into seeing a large ungulate that wandered in, lay down, and wandered out. The problem is that the AI doesn't squint, and the details don't cooperate. The first thing the system looked for was hoof impressions. When an elk lies down in soft mud, its hooves leave marks. They're cloven, they're distinctive, and they're impossible to miss in a substrate with the clay content and moisture level present at the Skookum site. The AI searched the full impression surface for hoof contact signatures. It found zero. Not faint ones, not ambiguous ones. None. Then it checked for knee callus compression. An elk's knees carry significant weight when the animal reclines, and they leave a specific, recognizable pattern in soft ground. Wrong location in the Skookum Cast. Wrong shape, wrong depth profile. No match. Then it ran the body proportion analysis. An elk's torso pressed into mud produces an impression with a specific length-to-width ratio determined by the animal's skeletal structure. The Skookum impression doesn't match that ratio. It's too wide in the hip region relative to the chest, a proportion the system recognized as consistent with a large primate's pelvic structure, not an ungulate's. Then the behavioral modeling. The AI's database contains extensive documentation of elk feeding behavior, and what that behavior does not include is a large prey animal reclining fully beside an unfamiliar food source in an open clearing for an extended period of time. Elk are prey animals. That posture, fully reclined, stationary, exposed, runs directly counter to every survival instinct their biology has built over millions of years. The elk theory requires an elk to have behaved in a way that no documented elk has ever behaved. And then there's the heel. On the left side of the Skookum cast is an impression that the AI flagged immediately, and that the elk theory simply cannot account for. It's a heel impression, long, curved, anatomically distinct, the kind of heel you find on a plantigrade foot. The full contact heel-to-toe foot structure of a primate. Not a hoof, not a paw, a heel. Elk don't have heels. No hoofed North American animal has heels. The system returned a flat classification on that point. The impression is biomechanically impossible for any ungulate species. Elk eliminated. The AI moved on to bears. Black and grizzly bears were modeled extensively. When a bear reclines, it leaves an impression shaped by its shoulder hump, its front paw structure, its wide rear end, and limbs that are short relative to its body mass. None of those markers appeared in the Skookum cast. What appeared instead were limb impression patterns consistent with extended, proportionally long lower limbs, far more consistent with primate anatomy than ursine anatomy. Bears eliminated. Then the human hoax. The system applied its full suite of fabrication detection to the cast surface, looking for tool marks, edges too clean, transitions too abrupt, any sign of mechanical manipulation of the mud. It found none. The impression contours showed the organic, uneven quality of biological contact, subtle asymmetries, micro variations in pressure, the kind of irregularity a living body in motion produces, and that fabrication consistently struggles to replicate. But the fabrication theory also fails on physics. A person in a costume lying in mud does not produce compression consistent with 600 to 800 pounds of body mass. The soil doesn't care about the costume. It responds to the weight actually pressing on it. The AI ran the compression data against soil composition and moisture levels at the time of the event, and returned a body mass estimate that no hoaxer in any suit could have generated. Hoax eliminated. Everything known eliminated, which left the system with a question it hadn't started with. Not which known animal made this, but what biological profile does the evidence actually describe? What the data built. When the AI stopped trying to match the impression to existing species and started building a profile from the evidence itself, what emerged was specific, not vague, not something large. Specific. Body mass between 600 and 900 pounds, based on soil compression at peak pressure points. That puts it in the same general range as a large male gorilla, the largest living great ape, but at a scale roughly 30% larger than any documented gorilla on record. Plantigrade foot structure, full contact heel-to-toe locomotion. That's primate locomotion. Every great ape walks this way. Humans walk this way. No North American quadruped walks this way. The heel impression alone tells you whatever this is walks upright. Limb proportions consistent with a large bipedal primate. Longer lower limbs relative to body width than seen in great apes, combined with a broader hip structure than human anatomy. That specific combination doesn't match any cataloged species, but it matches with striking consistency what witnesses across decades have described when they talk about what Bigfoot looks like. Wide, tall, tall, built differently from anything they'd seen before. Hair follicle impressions in the cast surface, the micro-impressions of hair roots preserved in the mud, showing a follicle density matching orangutan and gorilla patterns, but across a body surface area far larger than any catalogued great ape. Dense, coarse hair coverage, exactly what you'd expect from a large primate adapted to the cold, wet climate of the Pacific Northwest, and friction skin texture on the forearm area of the cast. Dermal ridge patterns, the equivalent of fingerprints on the foot surface, that were consistent with great ape skin structure, but different enough from every cataloged species that the system couldn't assign them to anything in its database. The profile that came back wasn't a known animal with some unusual features. It was a coherent biological picture of something adjacent to the great ape family that science has never formally described. The behavior is the part that's hardest to dismiss. Here's where the analysis stops being about anatomy and becomes something else entirely. The AI didn't just profile what came to the bait station, it profiled how it behaved before the approach, during feeding, and in the surrounding environment. And what that behavioral analysis described is an animal that isn't operating on instinct. It's operating on something that looks a lot like intelligence. Vegetation analysis around the clearing perimeter showed that something large had occupied multiple stationary positions at the tree line before approaching. Broken branches, compressed ground cover, a pattern consistent with an animal that spent significant time, possibly hours, watching the site before deciding to move on it. That's not opportunistic feeding, that's reconnaissance. Specific tree damage at points around the clearing showed a pattern the AI classified as structural testing. Branches bent and released in a way that suggested the subject was evaluating whether the trees could support rapid movement if it needed to leave quickly. It was checking its exits before it committed to being there. That's contingency planning. That's forward thinking. That's a level of cognition associated with great apes and almost nothing else. The body impression itself showed evidence of multiple position shifts, weight redistribution while the subject was in contact with the ground. It adjusted more than once. While feeding at a novel food source, it moved around, repositioned, settled in differently. That's not a static encounter. That's an animal that felt secure enough to get comfortable, which means it wasn't afraid of whatever left that bait there. And then there's the acoustic evidence, which is quiet in a way that doesn't make sense if you're expecting a large, unfamiliar animal to have passed through. The research team's audio equipment recorded no wildlife disturbance calls during the night in question. No bird alarms, no small mammal scatter. When large predators or unknown animals move through a forest, the surrounding animals respond. It's immediate and consistent. The forest has its own warning system, and it goes off reliably. It didn't go off that night. The local wildlife was not disturbed, which means whatever came to that bait station wasn't a stranger to those animals. They knew it. They'd been living alongside it long enough that its presence wasn't alarming. An animal that has territorial roots so established that the local wildlife doesn't react to it anymore has been in that area for a long time. Not weeks, not months, long enough for its presence to be part of the normal background of that ecosystem. The population problem. Here's where the analysis gets into territory that makes the whole conversation feel different. The AI didn't just analyze the Skookum cast in isolation, it cross-referenced the cast data against the full physical evidence database. Decades of footprint casts, hair samples, environmental DNA fragments, structural disturbances, and sighting reports from the same geographic corridor. And when it looked at all of it together, it stopped asking about a creature and started asking about a population. Because one thing the physical evidence across the Pacific Northwest corridor makes clear when you look at it collectively, rather than dismissing each piece individually, is that it's distributed in a pattern, not randomly, not in a scatter that suggests isolated incidents, in clusters along specific ecological features, river valleys with salmon runs, north-facing old-growth slopes, elevation gradients that allow seasonal movement between food zones, maintained territorial corridors, evidence of the same areas being used repeatedly across decades. That kind of distribution doesn't happen by accident. It requires animals that know their range, that pass that knowledge to younger animals, that have social structures capable of transmitting learned geography across generations, which is another way of saying great ape behavior. The population modeling the system ran came back with a minimum viable breeding population of 300 to 500 individuals spread across the Pacific Northwest corridor from Northern California through Washington and into British Columbia. Not one creature, not a small family, hundreds of animals living in a defined range, doing what animals do. And then the AI flagged something that no one in this debate has ever been able to satisfactorily explain away: zero mortality evidence. In 60-plus years of documented encounters across a population of several hundred large primates, no bones, no carcasses, no death sites, no roadkill, nothing. For any other large mammal in that range, elk, black bear, cougar, remain surface regularly. Hunters find them, hikers stumble on them, biologists document them. A population of several hundred animals generates mortality evidence continuously. The statistical probability of zero recoverable remains from a population this size over this time frame is, in the AI's calculation, vanishingly small, unless the animals are either selecting the most inaccessible terrain available as mortality sites or actively doing something with their dead. Both of those explanations require a level of behavioral sophistication that most people don't associate with an undiscovered animal, which maybe says something about how we've been thinking about this, why technology hasn't found them. The argument you hear most often from skeptics who've moved past the "it doesn't exist" position is, even if it does exist, we'd have found it by now. Satellites, drones, trail cameras, thermal imaging. How does a 700-pound ape hide from all of that? The AI ran the terrain and surveillance analysis. The answer is uncomfortable. Old-growth Pacific Northwest forest produces a canopy so dense that satellite imaging cannot penetrate it. The same technology that can read a license plate from orbit in a parking lot cannot see the ground through 300 feet of uninterrupted Douglas fir. Those forests are surveillance dead zones. The canopy that makes them visually extraordinary also makes them functionally invisible from above. Trail cameras deployed throughout Pacific Northwest wilderness by hunters, wildlife researchers, and government agencies combined cover less than 1% of the available habitat. 1%. The remaining 99% operates with no systematic visual monitoring at all. Thermal imaging falls below 40% penetration in mature forest at ranges beyond 50 meters. An animal moving through dense undergrowth is effectively invisible to thermal technology before it's close enough to see with the naked eye. The terrain itself is too rugged and too vast for sustained human survey presence. The most remote drainages, exactly where a species that avoids humans would concentrate, are places where most researchers spend essentially no time. We've been searching when we've searched at all, in the places that are easiest for us to reach. An intelligent animal learns where people go and goes somewhere else. The AI's estimate, approximately 70% of the relevant wilderness is functionally invisible to current monitoring technology. Hundreds of thousands of square miles of operational surveillance blackout. That is where the evidence consistently points. We've mapped the surface of Mars in higher resolution than the interior of the Cascade Range. So when someone says modern technology would have found it by now, the real question worth asking is, have we actually deployed modern technology seriously, in the right places, with the right tools, trying to find something that has had generations to learn how to avoid us? The final classification. After processing all of it, the cast measurements, the behavioral analysis, the paleontological cross-referencing, the population modeling, the terrain data, The system returned its classification: not elk, not bear, not a human hoax, not a known species with unusual features, unknown large-bodied terrestrial primate, unclassifiable within current taxonomic records. And then it produced one more number, a proximity calculation, based on territorial range estimates, habitat requirements, and the frequency and distribution of credible physical evidence across the Pacific Northwest. The AI calculated the statistical likelihood that a member of this unclassified species had been within 1 mile of human activity within the last 30 days. The number came back above 94%, not in some unreachable wilderness at the center of the Cascades, in forests where people hike, where hunters sit in blinds every autumn, where families camp in summer, within range of trails that someone is going to walk this weekend, close enough to observe, far enough and smart enough to stay out of reach. An animal capable of maintaining that kind of proximity to millions of people across decades of trail cameras and drones and thermal imaging without ever leaving a piece of physical evidence that the scientific community has formally responded to is not just an unknown animal, it's an exceptionally intelligent one. And that's the part that changes the question. Because if it understands, on some level, passed down through generations of learning, that staying hidden is what keeps it safe, then the reason we haven't found one yet starts to answer itself. Why this matters. Here's the thing that's worth sitting with after all of that. The AI wasn't built to take a side. It doesn't know what Bigfoot means as a cultural concept. It doesn't carry the baggage of the jokes and the blurry photographs and the decades of mockery that make serious researchers reluctant to attach their names to this subject. It was given data and told to measure things, and it returned results based entirely on what the measurements showed. And what the measurements showed consistently and across multiple independent analyses was a biological entity that doesn't match anything in the catalog. Real impressions, real weight, real anatomy, no fabrication markers, no known species match. The Skookum Cast isn't a curiosity. It's a 200-pound plaster record of a real encounter between a research team and something that science hasn't formally acknowledged. Something that left the clearing that night and kept going, kept living in those forests the way it always has, moving through the same mountain corridors, feeding along the same river valleys, staying just past the edge of what our current tools can confirm. Based on everything the AI found, there's a very high probability that it's still out there right now, somewhere in the hundreds of thousands of square miles that we've never fully mapped, within a mile of a trail that someone is going to hike this weekend, close enough to see them, far enough away to stay a mystery, apparently content to keep things that way for as long as it needs to, which, based on the evidence, appears to be a very, very long time. The only question worth asking now isn't whether the Skookum Cast is real. The data answered that. It's why, given everything the data is saying, we still haven't decided to actually go look. Not with a documentary crew, not with 2 enthusiasts and a trail camera. Actually look with the kind of resources and institutional commitment we bring to questions we've already decided deserve to be taken seriously. Because if the AI is right and the data is pointing where it appears to be pointing, then whatever is walking through those forests has been there the whole time, waiting for someone to finally ask the question properly.